Okay, so I want to come to this story from about 2.5 days ago, because of the way news travels from Rome. It's a Diane Montaigne story. Cardinal Fernandez confirms that Pope Francis already knew about his 1998 book, Mystical Passion, when he appointed him prefect of the Vatican's doctrinal office. And he compares his own perverse work to that of Pope John Paul II and Saint Hildegard of Bingen. That's weird. That's weird, because I don't think Hildegard of Bingen or Pope John Paul II ever wrote about our Lord having a sexual experience with an underage girl. They didn't. That's blasphemy. Francis knew about it and promoted Toucho to number 2. I can't stress the importance of what scienter, knowledge of someone's past bad deeds, does to his culpability, his cooperation, his formal cooperation in Toucho's project. Similarly, this time of the year last year, when we thought that the CDF, the number 2 in the church, instead of Toucho, was going to be Heiner Wilmer, the leader of the German Synodal Way, Francis definitely knew about Heiner Wilmer's support for all of the LMNOP agenda, because the way I know that Francis knew about Heiner Wilmer's support for it all was because Heiner Wilmer was the leader, and he had been sanctioned, you can't write this stuff, punished by the outgoing CDF at the time, Ladaria, just the month before Francis started floating Heiner Wilmer's name. So Francis, with Heiner Wilmer, had affirmative knowledge, scienter, that he was a heretic, just as he had knowledge that Toucho Fernandez, before his eventual elevation, he's the one that got the job. Heiner Wilmer was vetted closely for the job but didn't get it. Toucho Fernandez was a pervert. And when you talk to Pope splainers, they'll always slip into, well, like the mode where they express Francis's knowledge, aforethought of this perversity, as if it has to be dealt with in a strictly magisterial way. Think about it. Like, if I tell you something that has nothing to do with the magisterium, if you had the Pope to your house and you were playing checkers with your brother, and your brother cheated and admitted cheating, and he's like, I won by cheating at checkers, and the Pope were like a third party to it, and the Pope said something perverse, like, well, I think it's good he won by cheating. That's cool. You got to do what you got to do to win. You'd be scandalized by it. I'm not saying this has ever happened. It's a hypothetical. I purposely picked something absurd because there's no magisterial document that treats of this. You know, you'd be scandalized by it, and you'd be like, wow, that reflects on his character. He's a man. This is the way we judge men's characters, is honor. He's a man. The Pope's not Jesus Christ, our Lord. He's a man. You'd be like, wow, that's sleazy. The Pope's sleazy when he's playing board games because he approved of this guy who admitted to being a cheater at checkers. Or let's say it's cards. Your brother admitted he cheated you at a game of Texas Hold'em and won a couple $100 off you. And the Pope says, I would have done the same thing. That didn't happen. It's just a hypothetical. Pope splainers in that situation would be like, well, show me the document. I'm not talking about documents, man. I'm talking about the first principle of practical reason. Pope splainers are always theologians. I'm not saying all theologians are bad, but they're not philosophers. They're not lawyers. They're not people that are good at using arguments. They'll always slip into this stuff where they're like, well, I don't care. I don't care unless there's a document. I'm like, but you should care. I mean, think of how perverse this line of reasoning is. The moral culpability for the highest office in the world, Pope, much higher than President of the United States, means that we have higher standards than than the standards we apply to President of the United States. And if a president has a known history at cheating at cards, or kicking dogs, parking in handicapped parking spaces, these are reasonable compared to the things Pope Francis has done or approved of his friends doing. These are minor. But literally, it comes out in the election cycle. We're about to go through it in America in 2024 for President of the United States, which is not a particularly moral position. A lot of these guys are Masons. And at that lower scrutiny, that lower moral standard, if a presidential candidate has been accused of parking in a handicapped parking space, kicking a dog, frowning at babies, cheating at poker, he'll probably lose the election. If a president's friends are too sleazy or involved in the dark arts, let's just call it that, she'll lose the election. Think of 2016, the WikiLeaks dump of November 3rd, where it became crystal clear to everyone who had long talked about that candidate like she was up to witchy stuff. When it became crystal clear that she was, her connections to Marina Abramovich and basically holding seances, arguably that's what lost her the election. That's for president. This is for Pope, the vicar of Christ. And the main mark of a Pope-splainer, you're not hearing this from anywhere else, isn't what he's willing to cover or anything like that. The main mark of a Pope-splainer is a perverse person who holds the higher position of honor to a lower moral standard. That's a Pope-splainer. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Heavier is the head that wears the crown of Peter. That stands in place of the vicar of Christ and stands in place of Peter, who's a kingly office. Now, there are kingly offices like England, places like Syria still have a king. But those are lower moral standard kings. Of course they are. And yet Pope-splainers will defend the papacy, will defile the office by treating it with a lower moral standard than President of the United States. That's truly perverse. They'll treat it with a lower moral scrutiny than someone running for dog catcher. Francis, with his friends, writing literally child prawn, is now our doctrinal chief. That's perverse. Now, a lot of the folks on Twitter that are defending him are people that went nuts when Dennis Prager defended fictitious storybook literary child prawn, a description of which, as they should have gone nuts. That's a perversity. But they'll defend it. They'll defend it when Toucho Fernandez writes it himself, but they'll go apeshit when Dennis Prager says, theoretically, it's not that big of a deal. Now, they were right in the latter, wrong in the former, not the other way around. But we're talking about Toucho Fernandez being the author of literary child prawn. And Francis knew about this book, sick book on orgasms, before he elevated him, and they'll defend that. Now, there's another number two in the church, if you don't understand the way that the Vatican's set up. That we on this channel, we're always talking about doctrine. We're always talking about ideas. And therefore, when I say number two in the church, I'm talking about doctrine. There's another number two in the church. There's the Cardinal Secretary of State, which is Cardinal Pietro Parolin. And at times in this pontificate, Francis has had 3 CDFs, 3 doctrinal number twos. He burns through them because he can't find one liberal enough. Mueller was a little more conservative than Ladaria. Ladaria was a bit more conservative than Toucho. He's burnt through them, but when Francis wants to engage in some novelty or innovation, act of revolution that's too rich, even for the blood of his CDF, he'll send a message through his other number two, his administrative statesman, Cardinal Parolin, which is weird. They did the same thing when they announced the partial third secret of Fatima in 2000. They didn't announce, JP2 didn't announce it through Ratzinger, who was his doctrinal chief. He announced it through a combination of his two highest statesmen. That's weird. That means you're obviating, you're going around the obvious officer who holds that office. That always stinks of something. Well, Pietro Parolin recently, Cardinal Secretary of State, has commented on the divided reaction to the Fiducia Supplicans document, and he's had a great backlash from Episcopal conferences, and he essentially says, it might rain tomorrow, it might not. He said, some people are pleased by it, some people are not. We don't love it.